The first time my stepfather lost control, I was lying in a hospital bed after surgery. He walked in, leaned over me, and slapped me so hard the heart monitor started screaming. Then he said something that didn't make sense until months later. He told me to stop digging into things that didn't concern me. What he didn't know was that by that point, I had already noticed the pills he forced my mother to take every morning, the credit card opened in my name, and the $500,000 life insurance policy that made him the only beneficiary. My name is Rowan Hale, and the night he slapped me was the night I realized my stepfather wasn't just controlling our family. He had been running the same scam on vulnerable women for years, and the only reason he panicked in that hospital room was because he thought I was about to expose everything. Chapter 1. The Night My Stepfather Lost Control. The first thing I remember was the smell of antiseptic and the uneven rhythm of a heart monitor somewhere beside me. Morning light filtered through the hospital blinds in thin gray lines, the kind of cold winter light Seattle is famous for. I had just come out of a minor stomach surgery at St. Vincent Regional. The nurse told me it was routine, nothing serious. A few stitches, a short recovery, and I would be home in a couple of days. The anesthesia had not fully worn off yet. My head felt heavy and distant, like I was still half asleep underwater. I heard the door open and assumed it was another nurse checking the monitors. Instead, I saw my stepfather. Thomas Garrison stood at the end of my hospital bed. He was 58, tall, composed, the kind of man who always looked perfectly prepared for a business meeting, even when he was only walking to the mailbox. In our neighborhood in Ballard, people liked him. He dressed well, spoke calmly, and always seemed to know exactly what to say to make people trust him. But the man standing in that hospital room did not look calm. His face was tight, his eyes bright in a way I had never seen before. Not angry, exactly. Something sharper, something nervous. "What are you doing here?" I managed to say. My voice sounded dry and distant to my own ears. Thomas did not answer. He walked to the side of my bed and stared at me for a moment, as if he were trying to decide something. Then he hit me. The slap landed hard against my cheek before my brain could process what was happening. My head snapped to the side. The heart monitor beside me erupted into sharp electronic alarms. For a second, everything froze. Then the room exploded into motion. A nurse rushed in first, followed by another. Someone shouted for security. Thomas stepped back, breathing heavily, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "You need to stop digging into things that do not concern you," he said. His voice was low at first, then louder. "You are tearing this family apart." Security grabbed his arms as he kept talking. He said I had always had a problem with him. He said I was unstable. He said my mother did not deserve this kind of stress. They pulled him toward the hallway while he continued shouting over his shoulder. The door closed, and the room filled with questions. "Are you okay? Can you feel your face? Did he hurt you anywhere else?" I nodded and shook my head at the same time, still trying to understand what had just happened. About 15 minutes later, a police officer named Lucas Bennett stood near the window taking notes. He asked what happened. I told him. He wrote everything down carefully, occasionally glancing up to make sure I was following. "Do you want to press charges today, Ms. Hale?" I looked down at the hospital blanket covering my legs. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, but another part of me was thinking about my mother. If I pressed charges that morning, Thomas would know that whatever quiet tension existed between us had officially become a war. And if he was capable of hitting me in a hospital room, I did not want to imagine what he might do to my mother if he felt cornered. "I need some time," I said. Officer Bennett nodded. He said a report would still be filed and that Thomas had been warned. If I changed my mind, I could call the department anytime. At that moment, I convinced myself it had just been a burst of anger. But weeks later, I realized something important. Thomas had not lost control. He had panicked. To understand why, I have to go back almost 10 years. My father, Daniel Hale, died in a car accident in 2015. One moment he was driving home from a construction site outside Everett, and the next moment a truck slid across wet pavement and erased the life we had known. I was 22 and had just finished college. My mother, Eleanor Hale, was 55 and still teaching second grade in Seattle public schools. My father had always been the steady center of our family. When he died, the house did not fall apart overnight, but everything shifted. There was money from his life insurance, around $400,000 after debts were settled, enough to keep the house and give my mother time to adjust, but not enough for careless mistakes. That's when Thomas appeared. He met my mother at a financial planning seminar in Shoreline for people who had recently lost spouses. At least, that's the story he told us. He said he worked in investment consulting and spent his time helping families avoid financial disasters during emotional transitions. At first, he was exactly what my mother needed. He sat with her at the kitchen table for hours, explaining retirement accounts and tax forms. He reviewed the insurance payout for my father and helped reorganize some of the savings into safer investments. He spoke patiently and never sounded rushed. After months of watching my mother struggle through grief, it felt like someone had finally stepped in to help. 2 years later, they were married. In public, Thomas looked like the perfect husband. He joined a bowling league nearby and quickly made friends. He helped neighbors fix fences and offered casual advice about retirement plans. People trusted him easily. For a long time, I tried to trust him too. But slowly, small things began to bother me. Thomas took over more and more responsibility in the house. He paid the bills, he managed the bank accounts, he handled my mother's medical insurance. If I asked about anything, he would smile and say he had already taken care of it. He never sounded defensive. That was what made it hard to question him. Around late 2022, I started noticing changes in my mother. Eleanor had always been active. Even after retiring, she walked every morning and volunteered at the community library twice a week. Then suddenly, she seemed tired all the time. She slept longer, her hands trembled slightly when she poured coffee. Some mornings, she looked almost sedated, her eyelids heavy and slow. One evening, I asked if she had seen a doctor. Before she could answer, Thomas spoke from the living room. "She's getting older, Rowan. That is not a crime." He laughed softly as if I was being dramatic. I wanted to believe him, but a few weeks later, I noticed something strange in the kitchen. Thomas stood at the counter with 3 bottles lined up in front of him. "Vitamins," he said, "supplements to help with energy and inflammation." When he saw me, he quickly twisted the caps closed and slid them aside. "Just making sure your mother takes care of herself," he said. I nodded and walked away. The moment that truly changed things came early one morning not long after. My mother sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, while Thomas handed her the pills from those bottles. She swallowed them obediently and took a few sips of juice. 10 minutes later, her head dipped forward. She blinked slowly, struggling to keep her eyes open. For a moment, she might fall asleep right there at the table. Something cold moved through me then. Not panic, not certainty, just attention. And once I started paying attention to Thomas Garrison, I realized how many small things I had ignored. Chapter 2. The Man Everyone Trusted. I was buying time. That was the truth I did not admit out loud. Not to the police officer in the hospital room, not to my mother, and not even to myself. But once I began looking at Thomas Garrison with real attention, the kind of attention my job had trained me to use, I could not stop noticing things. The strange part was that almost everyone trusted him. In our neighborhood in Ballard, people liked Thomas. It was the kind of place where neighbors still waved from their driveways and asked about each other's families. When Thomas moved into our lives, he fit into that world easily. On Saturday mornings, he walked down to the bakery on Market Street and returned with 2 white boxes full of pastries. One box for our kitchen table, the other for whoever happened to be outside watering plants or raking leaves. He always asked people about their retirement plans, their savings, their worries about the future. Not in a pushy way, just friendly questions that somehow turned into advice. People liked that. They liked a man who sounded confident about money. One of those people was Margaret Holloway. Margaret lived next door in a pale blue house with a small wooden porch that faced our driveway. She was 74 and had spent most of her life as a nurse at Swedish Medical Center before retiring. She had a calm voice that made people relax the moment they heard it. Margaret cared about my mother. After my father died, she stopped by often with soup or bread or simple excuses just to sit at the kitchen table with Eleanor and make sure she was not alone too long. When Thomas appeared in our lives, Margaret seemed relieved. "Your mother deserves someone steady again," she told me once while we stood near the fence between our yards. "Thomas is a good man. You can tell by how he listens." Back then, I believed her. For a while, everyone did. But Margaret was also the first person who hinted that something was wrong. It was the summer of 2023 when she mentioned it. I had just pulled into the driveway after work when Margaret waved from her porch. She held a watering can in one hand and had that thoughtful look she wore when something bothered her. "Your mom doing okay lately?" she asked. I shrugged. "Why?" Margaret hesitated for a moment. "I saw her walking to the mailbox earlier," she said. "She had to stop halfway down the path and hold the railing. Just looked very tired." I told Margaret the same thing I had been telling myself. The doctor said she just needed more rest. Margaret nodded, but her expression did not change. The truth was, I had noticed the same thing. Around late 2022, my mother began slowing down in ways that did not feel normal. Eleanor had always been active. Even after retiring from teaching second grade, she walked every morning and volunteered at the community library. Then, gradually, she seemed tired all the time. She slept later, she moved slower. Some mornings, her hands trembled slightly when she lifted her coffee mug. One evening, I asked if she had seen a doctor about it. Before she could answer, Thomas spoke from the living room. "She is getting older, Rowan. That is not a crime." He laughed lightly as if the whole thing was a harmless misunderstanding. I wanted to believe him. For a while, I did. The first moment something truly bothered me happened one afternoon when I came home early from work. The house was quiet when I walked in. I heard movement in the kitchen. Thomas stood at the counter with 3 bottles lined up in front of him, beside a glass of orange juice. He was tapping pills from each bottle into his hand with careful precision. When he saw me, he reacted quickly. He twisted the caps closed and pushed the bottles aside. "Just getting your mother set up for the day," he said with an easy smile. "What are those?" "Supplements, vitamins, things older bodies need." He slid the bottles farther away as he spoke. I nodded and left the room, but the moment stayed with me. It was not fear, just curiosity. A few weeks later, something happened that I could not ignore. I was sitting at my desk during lunch, scrolling through my banking app, when I noticed an unfamiliar credit card account listed under my name. The card had a $15,000 limit. I had never applied for it. At first, I assumed it was a technical error, but when I called the bank, the representative confirmed the account had been opened online 3 weeks earlier. The application came from our home address. The device used was a desktop computer. We only had one desktop computer in that house. When I returned home that evening, Thomas was sitting at the dining table reviewing financial statements. I placed my phone in front of him. "Did you open a credit card in my name?" He barely glanced at the screen. "Probably a mistake by the bank." "They said it came from this house." Thomas leaned back in his chair and studied me calmly. "Rowan, you work too much. You always assume something bad is happening. Technology makes mistakes all the time." His tone was so steady that for a moment I wondered if he might be right. Later that night, I called the bank again. This time, the representative was more careful. "Someone used your personal information to apply for the account," she said. "If you did not authorize it, you may want to report identity theft." When I told Thomas what the bank said, he shook his head slowly. "You are overthinking this." Then he did something subtle. He told my mother his version of the story. Not the details, just the parts that made me sound unstable. That evening, Eleanor sat beside me on the couch looking concerned. "Thomas says you're really stressed from work lately," she said softly. "Maybe that's why you're worried about the bank situation." I stared at her. "You think I imagined a credit card?" "No, I just think maybe something else happened with the account." From the kitchen, Thomas watched us with that patient expression people used when they believed they were the reasonable one in the room. That was the first time I understood what gaslighting actually felt like. It was not shouting. It was quiet doubt repeated often enough that you start questioning your own memory. Over the following months, Thomas continued building that quiet story about me. Rowan works too much. Rowan worries about everything. Rowan always assumes the worst. Meanwhile, he started pushing a different idea with my mother: power of attorney. He explained it carefully during several conversations at the kitchen table. If Eleanor ever became seriously ill, someone would need legal authority to manage her finances. It was simply good planning. You never know what the future holds, he said. My mother looked uncertain, but listened. One evening, I overheard them discussing it again. "Maybe Rowan should be part of this conversation," my mother suggested. Thomas smiled gently. "Rowan already has too much stress in her life." The final piece of the puzzle appeared by accident. One night, Thomas stepped outside to take a phone call while I was using the desktop in the study. Several folders were open on the screen. I tried not to look at them. Then one name caught my attention: Denise Porter. I clicked on the folder before I could talk myself out of it. Inside were scanned documents, emails, and financial spreadsheets. They weren't labeled clearly, but one thing was obvious. These were personal files, and Denise Porter appeared again and again. I closed the folder quickly when I heard the back door open. Thomas entered the room a moment later. "Did you need something on the computer?" he asked. "Just checking email." He studied the screen for a second before nodding. Later that night, I searched the name Denise Porter online. Within minutes, I found the connection. She had once been married to a man named Thomas Garrison. The divorce had been finalized years earlier. I sat in the glow of my laptop staring at that information for a long time, because that was the moment a new thought finally formed. Maybe what was happening in our house was not something Thomas invented for us. Maybe he had done this before. And maybe my mother was not the first woman who trusted him. Chapter 3. The Pattern I Was Never Supposed to See. I could not stop thinking about the name on that screen. Denise Porter. The more I stared at the search results on my laptop that night, the more uneasy I felt. A divorce record from several years earlier, a small business listing in Tacoma for a nail salon under the same name, a public address attached to the business license. The details were ordinary, but something about them made the story Thomas had always told feel incomplete. Until that moment, I had accepted the version of his life he presented to us, a financial consultant who met my widowed mother at the right time and helped her rebuild stability, a man who simply wanted a quiet life in Seattle. Now I was not so sure. My job involved analyzing patterns in messy data: insurance fraud, billing irregularities, strange clusters of numbers that did not look important until you placed them beside other numbers. What I had just found felt like the beginning of a pattern, so I started digging. The next morning before work, I searched through public court databases. Washington state records were not difficult to access if you knew where to look. Within an hour, I found something that made my stomach tighten. Thomas Garrison had been married before my mother. Twice. The first marriage ended in 2011. The second ended in 2017. My mother married him in 2018. The timeline alone was unsettling. But what disturbed me more was how little Thomas had ever said about his past. He mentioned one previous marriage once, briefly during a family dinner years ago. He framed it as a mistake from his younger days, something that ended long before he met Eleanor. He never mentioned two. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside my office for almost 20 minutes, staring at the Tacoma address listed under Denise Porter's business registration. Finally, I started the engine. Tacoma was about 45 minutes south of Seattle, if traffic behaved. That day, the freeway was slow, the sky gray and low, like it usually was in late winter. I kept wondering if I was making a mistake. Maybe Denise would refuse to talk to me. Maybe she would hang up the moment I mentioned Thomas. But curiosity pushed me forward. Her salon sat in a small strip mall beside a coffee shop and a dry cleaner. When I stepped inside, the smell of acetone and lavender lotion filled the room. 3 customers sat in massage chairs while technicians worked quietly. A woman behind the front counter looked up. She had dark hair pulled back neatly and tired eyes that seemed to measure people quickly. "Can I help you?" Her voice was polite but cautious. "Are you Denise Porter?" "Yes." I hesitated for a second. "My name is Rowan Hale. I think you used to be married to a man named Thomas Garrison." The room seemed to go very quiet. Denise did not answer right away. She just looked at me carefully, as if deciding something. Then she nodded toward a small table near the back of the salon. "Give me a minute." When she joined me a few moments later, she sat down slowly. "You said Thomas Garrison?" she asked. "Yes." Another long silence passed, then Denise exhaled softly. I wondered when someone else would show up. The words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Denise folded her hands together. "You are not the first woman who has asked me about him." I felt my chest tighten. I told her about my mother, about how Thomas entered our lives after my father died, about the financial advice, the careful planning, the quiet way he took over responsibilities in the house. Denise listened without interrupting. When she finished, she shook her head slowly. "That is exactly how he starts." "What do you mean?" Denise leaned back in her chair. "Thomas always finds women who are vulnerable. Divorce, grief, financial stress. He presents himself as the calm solution to their problems." She looked directly at me. "He did it to me." Denise told me they met at a financial planning workshop almost 10 years earlier. At the time, her small business had been struggling after the pandemic. Thomas offered advice about restructuring loans and managing savings. At first, he was helpful. "Very patient," Denise said. "He made me feel like someone finally understood how stressful money can be." Within a year, they were married. After that, things changed slowly. Thomas insisted on helping with the salon accounts, then he started managing the household finances, too. Denise said he often moved money between accounts without explaining clearly why. When she asked questions, he told her the transfers were investments. 1 year later, she discovered that most of her personal savings had disappeared. "Where did the money go?" I asked. Denise shook her head. "He always had explanations, complicated ones. By the time I realized what was happening, the accounts were empty." "So you divorced him?" "Immediately." She studied my face. "Your mother married him the year after our divorce. That timing never sat right with me." My mind raced through everything I had seen in our house: the vitamin bottles, the credit card, the quiet conversations about power of attorney. Before I could ask another question, Denise added something else. "You know what the strange part is?" "What?" "Another woman contacted me a few years ago asking about Thomas." "Who?" Denise frowned slightly. "I don't remember her last name. Megan something. She said she dated him briefly." That name stayed with me all the way back to Seattle. When I got home that night, I searched again. It took a little time, but eventually I found her. Megan Riley. I hesitated before sending the message, but the next morning she replied. We met 2 days later at a coffee shop near her office. Megan was in her third ladies, confident and direct in a way that made it clear she was used to negotiating deals. She listened carefully as I explained why I wanted to talk. When I mentioned Thomas Garrison, her expression changed immediately. "I'd dated him for a few weeks in 2019, she said. "And?" Megan stirred her coffee slowly. Something about him felt off. "How?" He asked a lot of questions about my finances, savings accounts, retirement funds, property investments. On the first few dates? "I thought it was just curious at first," she continued, "but it started to feel like an interview." "So you ended it?" "Yes." She looked at me seriously. That man was not interested in me. He was interested in my assets. Driving home that evening, I felt the pattern forming clearly in my mind. 3 women, 3 similar stories, each one meeting Thomas during a moment when financial stability mattered. Each one slowly drawn into trusting him with money. By the time I reached Ballard, I was no longer thinking of Thomas as my stepfather. I was thinking of him as a system, a method. That night, after dinner, I walked quietly into the hallway bathroom where my mother kept her medications. Inside the cabinet, I found the same 3 vitamin bottles I had seen earlier. I took them out and photographed the labels. The next morning, I visited a pharmacy near my office and asked to speak with the pharmacist. His name was Aaron Kim. He studied the photos on my phone carefully. "Individually, these supplements are harmless," he said. Then he pointed to the ingredient lists. "But taken together over a long period, they can stress the liver. They can cause fatigue, weakness, sometimes confusion in older patients." My stomach tightened. Could they make someone look sick over time? Aaron nodded slowly. "In certain situations, yes." I left the pharmacy feeling colder than I had walked in. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Thomas. A single short text. "Why are you talking to Denise Porter?" I stared at the screen. For a moment, the world around me felt very quiet. Until then, I had believed I was the one investigating him. But that message told me something important. Thomas was watching me, too. And for the first time since this began, I realized I might not just be uncovering his pattern, I might have become part of it. Chapter 4. Building the Case. Fear stopped being abstract after that message. Until then, I had been investigating quietly, telling myself I was only gathering context. But when Thomas texted me asking why I had spoken to Denise Porter, everything changed. It meant he was watching me, maybe checking my calls, maybe monitoring something else. Either way, the illusion that I was invisible inside my own investigation disappeared. I understood one thing very clearly. I could not confront him without proof. In my job analyzing medical insurance data, I had learned a simple rule. When something does not look right, you do not accuse immediately. You document, you preserve, you build a case strong enough that no one can explain it away. So that is what I began to do. The study downstairs had always been Thomas's territory. He kept the desktop computer there and most of the household paperwork. For years, I had barely looked at it. Now it became the center of everything. Thomas was not careful with technology. He liked passwords that sounded clever but were easy to guess. He saved documents and folders with ordinary names like retirement review and tax planning. Over several nights, I started copying everything I could. Emails, financial statements, insurance documents, scanned contracts. I used a small external hard drive hidden inside an old makeup bag in the back of my closet. Every night after Thomas and my mother went to bed, I locked my bedroom door and transferred files quietly, stopping whenever I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway. The more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. He was moving money between accounts attached to my mother's name, not huge withdrawals that would cause alarm, smaller amounts that looked administrative. $900 labeled consulting, $1,200 labeled account adjustment, $800 labeled investment allocation. Individually, they looked harmless. Together, they looked like someone slowly draining a reservoir. The biggest discovery happened late on a rainy Thursday. I was reviewing a folder labeled Estate Preparation when I found a document that made my stomach drop. A life insurance policy. $500,000. Issued in my mother's name. Beneficiary listed as Thomas Garrison. Sole beneficiary. The policy had been signed in early 2023. Right around the same time, my mother started getting noticeably weaker. I read the document again and again, hoping I had misunderstood something, but I had not. I printed copies the next morning at work because I no longer trusted keeping evidence in only one place. That afternoon, I went to the Seattle Police Department. Detective Marcus Delaney did not look impressed when I first sat down across from him. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes that suggested he had spent years listening to stories that were impossible to prove. He let me talk without interrupting. When I finished explaining everything, he leaned back in his chair. So, your stepfather assaulted you in the hospital, your mother's finances look suspicious, and you believe he might be slowly poisoning her. I think he is weakening her, I said. Marcus studied me carefully. Do you have medical proof? Not yet. Do you have a witness who saw him give her something harmful? No. He nodded slowly. Right. Right now, this looks like a family dispute with financial irregularities. That does not mean you are wrong. It means if I move too soon without solid evidence, his lawyer shuts everything down. I placed the documents from Denise Porter and Megan Riley on his desk. He has done this before. Marcus read the pages carefully. When he looked up again, his expression had changed slightly. These women willing to speak officially? Denise probably would. He tapped the papers thoughtfully. This helps, but I still need more. I left the station frustrated, but at least someone else had seen what I was seeing. Back home, the atmosphere had shifted. Thomas no longer pretended I was harmless. He watched me in small ways that would seem normal to anyone else, pausing before answering questions, glancing at my phone when it buzzed, smiling slightly when my mother left the room. One night, I walked downstairs around midnight and found him sitting at the dining table with my laptop open in front of him. My heart slammed against my ribs. "What are you doing?" He looked up calmly. "You left this out." I did not. He closed the laptop and pushed it toward me. "You have been very stressed lately, Rowan. I wanted to make sure you weren't mixing work problems with all these suspicions." I forced myself to stay calm. Earlier that day, I had already moved all the evidence off my computer onto the external drive. If he had searched through the laptop, he would find nothing important. Still, my hands were shaking when I carried it back upstairs. After that, I knew I needed something stronger than documents. I needed proof of what he was doing now. I ordered a small indoor camera online and had it delivered to my office instead of the house. It looked like an ordinary phone charger. I hid it on a shelf in the study where it faced the desk Thomas used for paperwork. The first 2 days, nothing happened. On the third evening, my heart nearly stopped. I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store checking the camera feed on my phone when Thomas walked into the study. He stopped in the doorway and stared toward the shelf. For a moment, I thought he had found it. He stood there for several seconds. Then he turned away and sat down at the desk. I exhaled so hard, the woman parked next to me glanced over. Meanwhile, my mother kept getting weaker. Not dramatically, that would have been easier to fight. It was the slow erosion that terrified me. She forgot simple things. She tired halfway through washing dishes. Sometimes she seemed confused about what day it was. One afternoon, I found her sitting at the kitchen table staring out the window. "I don't feel right lately," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I'm always tired. It feels like my body is slowing down." Before I could answer, Thomas walked in carrying groceries. "That's because you keep pushing yourself," he said smoothly. "You need rest." He kissed the top of her head and placed the grocery bag on the counter. Watching him act gentle made my skin crawl. 2 nights later, during dinner, he announced something new. "I booked a trip," he said casually while cutting his chicken. My fork paused in midair. What kind of trip? Arizona, Scottsdale. 2 weeks at a quiet resort. Your mother needs sun and relaxation. My mother looked surprised. You already planned it? I thought it would be nice. I watched her face carefully. She did not look excited. She looked tired. If she travels, I said carefully, her doctor probably should know. Thomas set down his wine glass. Rowan, not every decision requires your approval. The tension at the table stayed long after dinner ended. The next morning, I went back to Detective Delaney with the insurance policy and the financial timeline I had built. Marcus studied the documents carefully. This is stronger, he said finally. If these signatures are questionable and the transfers lead directly to him, I can try for a warrant based on financial fraud. How long will that take? He hesitated. Not long enough for comfort. When I walked outside, the sky over Seattle was gray and heavy with rain. People moved along the sidewalks like any other day, but all I could think about was my mother sitting in that house with Thomas.
Chapter 5. The night the truth came out. The waiting became unbearable because every day felt like a race I could not control. For nearly 2 weeks, I moved through normal life while everything inside me stayed fixed on one question. Would the police move fast enough? Detective Marcus Delaney had my files, the insurance policy, the transfer records, and the statements from Denise Porter and Megan Riley. The case was growing, but my mother was still in the same house as Thomas Garrison, and Thomas had already booked Arizona. 2 weeks in Scottsdale, he said. Warm weather, fresh air, sunshine for Eleanor's health. He printed the itinerary and left it on the kitchen counter like it was a romantic surprise. To anyone else, it looked thoughtful. To me, it looked like distance, isolation, time I could not control. My mother was getting weaker by the day. She slept longer, she forgot small things. Sometimes she stared at a sentence in a book and lost track of where she was. Thomas noticed it too, but he always had an explanation. She just needs rest, he would say calmly. Every time he spoke those words, I felt something in my chest tighten. On the 12th day, Marcus finally called. We have enough for a warrant, he said. I closed my office door before speaking. And my mother? We will not let him take her to Arizona. For the first time in days, I could breathe. Marcus explained the plan. They wanted Thomas somewhere public, somewhere controlled, somewhere he would not panic and hurt someone. There was only one place that fit perfectly: Northside Lanes. Thomas never missed Friday night bowling. He loved that place. The noise, the laughter, the way people clapped when he threw a good shot. It was where his charm worked best, where he looked like the respectable man everyone believed he was, which was exactly why Marcus wanted him there. That Friday night, the sky over Seattle hung low and gray after a day of steady rain. At dinner, Thomas seemed unusually cheerful. He talked about the bowling league standings while cutting his salmon. You should come tonight, Rowan. Might be the week I finally win the winter trophy. I met his eyes across the table. I would not miss it. My mother barely touched her food. She looked pale and tired, but Thomas still set the small pile of evening supplements beside her plate like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I watched her swallow them. Something cold and steady settled in my chest. At 7:45, I pulled into the parking lot at Northside Lanes. My phone buzzed before I stepped out of the car. Marcus, we are here. The bowling alley smelled like fried food and beer. The familiar crash of pins echoed across polished lanes. Families sat near the arcade while men from Thomas's league crowded around pitchers of cheap beer. Thomas stood on lane 6. He looked completely relaxed. That was the part that struck me hardest, the ease of him, the way a man could quietly destroy someone's life and still laugh easily under neon lights. He noticed me and lifted a hand. I forced a small smile. For the next 15 minutes, I stood near the vending machines pretending to watch the game while my pulse hammered in my ears. Marcus had told me the timing mattered. They needed him focused. Thomas stepped forward for his turn. The ball rolled smoothly down the lane and smashed into the pins. Strike. People clapped and someone shouted his name. Thomas turned with his usual grin forming, ready to accept the applause. That was when two officers moved in from opposite sides of the lane. Marcus stepped forward behind them. For a moment, Thomas looked confused. Then Marcus spoke. "Thomas Garrison, you are under arrest for financial fraud and identity theft. Put your hands where I can see them." The entire bowling alley went silent. "What is this?" Thomas said sharply. "There must be a mistake." He looked around for support, for someone to step forward and defend him. But charm disappears quickly when a warrant appears. Marcus repeated the order. Thomas's eyes found me across the room. The expression on his face changed instantly. "You," he said quietly. Just one word. The officers pulled his hands behind his back, and the cuffs clicked shut. The sound echoed louder than the bowling pins had moments earlier. "You cannot do this," Thomas said as they led him toward the exit. "This is ridiculous." No one answered. The same people who had laughed with him minutes earlier now watched in stunned silence. As they pushed through the doors, my phone vibrated. A message from Marcus's partner. "House secure. Eleanor is with medics." My legs almost gave out with relief. While Thomas was being taken downtown, officers executed the search warrant at our house in Ballard. By midnight, they had recovered everything. Forged financial documents, account transfers, identity files connected to women Thomas had targeted before. The evidence was overwhelming. My mother was taken back to St. Vincent Regional for medical evaluation. When I walked into her bedroom, she looked small in the bed, but she was awake and alert in a way I hadn't seen in months. She reached for my hand. "What happened?" she asked softly. I sat beside her. The truth finally caught up to him. Later that night, Dr. Avery Klein explained the results. "Your mother was taking supplements that wouldn't harm every patient," she said carefully, "but together and over long periods, they can cause fatigue, confusion, and stress on the liver." My mother stared at her. "Are you saying he made me sick?" Dr. Klein chose her words carefully. "I am saying your body was being pushed in the wrong direction." That was enough. My mother turned away and cried quietly into the pillow. The investigation widened quickly after that. Once police had the financial records, everything started connecting. The stolen credit accounts, the insurance policy, the earlier complaints from Denise Porter, additional women who had encountered Thomas over the years. His advisory license was suspended within days, then revoked entirely. The man who had built his life on appearing trustworthy suddenly had no credibility left to hide behind. Recovery for my mother was slower. The first improvements were small. She slept less during the day, the tremor in her hands faded, her thoughts became clearer. The shame took longer. One afternoon, months later, we sat together on the front porch while spring sunlight warmed the street. My mother stared at the quiet neighborhood for a long time. "I still don't understand how I trusted him," she said. "I thought about every careful word Thomas ever used, every moment he made himself look helpful instead of controlling. People like him are very good at pretending to protect you," I said. She nodded slowly. "I thought he was saving us." That sentence stayed with me, because that's exactly what Thomas counted on. Not love, not loyalty, gratitude. The rest of our life slowly rebuilt itself. My mother planted herbs again in the backyard. Margaret Holloway brought over lemon bars and sat with us on the porch like she had after my father died. Detective Delaney called once to tell me the prosecution was moving forward. Life did not suddenly become perfect, but it became ours again.
Thomas Garrison believed no one would notice the small details. A bottle turned the wrong way on the counter, a credit card hidden inside normal transactions, a woman growing weaker while everyone called it aging. But the truth about people like Thomas is this: they rarely fail because of one big mistake. They fail because of 100 small ones someone decides to see. If you've ever felt that quiet voice telling you something is wrong, even when everyone else says it's nothing, listen to it. Those small details might be the thing that saves you. And if this story reminded you of someone, or if you've ever had to trust your instincts before you had proof, share it. Stories like this matter because the more we talk about them, the harder it becomes for people like Thomas to hide in plain sight.